As we continue on through our color theory unit of study, we're going to continue learning about some of those characteristics of color. Now, so far we have learned about the first two. The first one being color hue or local color. So with hue and local color, remember those two words are interchangeable. You can use either one, but that basically refers to the color name on the color wheel. And once we took a look at this, we then started to look at the second characteristic of color, which was value. And value is that range of light to dark that color can take on. So every color from the color wheel can be light, dark, or anywhere in the middle. Now, if you add white to a color, if we were mixing with acrylic paints, for example, adding white to a color lightens it, and that would be called a tint. And if you add black to a color, that would make it darker, and that would be called a shade. So value basically ranges anywhere from white to black with all of the values in between. But now today we're going to take a look at that third characteristic of color, which is saturation. Now this one is quite possibly one of the most important, but one of the most complex aspects of color. So saturation basically refers to a color's brightness or dullness. So a color can be really bright and vibrant. That would be considered a saturated color, or it can become a really dull and dark color where a lot of the purity of the color has been sort of taken away or canceled out. So that bright to dull scale is going to be saturation, and we're going to practice mixing some of these colors today. Now, for our assignment, what I'd like for you to do is have your watercolors out and a water cup with a paper towel. And then you'll also just need a piece of sketchbook paper. The sketchbook paper that I'm using is a mixed media paper, so it will work with watercolor really well. But if you have regular sketchbook paper, that should work just fine too, since this is not going to be a really nice finished painting that we're creating. This is just going to be really a paint-along color mixing exercise. So what I'd like for you to do is take a piece of paper, and you're going to go ahead and tape it off the same way that we have done before, where you stick the masking tape all along all four edges, but also stick it to your pants and peel it up before you put it down. That's going to help prevent your paper from tearing later. The next thing that we're going to do is make sure we clean off our palette and each one of our colors really well. So rinse your brush and make sure you have nice, fresh, clean water and a paper towel to work with. And if your paints have any colors mixed on the top, just make sure you give that a good rinse and clean those colors up, because we want to start with nice, bright colors today. And then if your paint tray has color on there as well, you can just re-wet that and wipe it out with a paper towel, or you can rinse it under the sink. Now we're ready to get started. So at the top of your page, what I'd like for you to do is start by putting your name in the top right-hand corner. And then in the center, we're going to write saturation scale. So the way that saturation works is if you take two opposite colors on the color wheel, or you can also call that complementary colors. So if I take blue and come across to see what color is directly across from it, that would be orange. Those two complementary colors are the exact opposites on the color wheel, meaning they have nothing in common. They are polar opposites. But if you take those two colors and you start to mix them together, you're going to create a really dull, desaturated neutral in the middle. And this is true for any complementary pair on the color wheel. So I could take red and green, for example. That would create a dull neutral in the middle. Or yellow and violet. That would create a dull neutral in the middle. And those are our three basic sets of complementary colors using the primary and secondary colors. Now this could also work if you take a look at tertiary colors as well, like red, violet, and yellow, green, but those are a little bit more complex to mix, so we're going to kind of leave the tertiary colors out of our exercise today and just work with the primary and secondary complementary colors. So what I'd like for you to do is on your piece of paper, we're going to divide this up into 3 rows. Now, we're not going to measure anything too precisely, but just create a little line for the top row and then a little line for the middle and the bottom row. These don't have to be perfect. You can draw it with a ruler if you want to, but we're just going to break this space up into 3 sections. Now, on this side, for the top row, we're going to label this one blue, and then taking a look at our color wheel, the opposite of blue is orange. So on the other side, we're going to label this side orange. Then we're going to take a look at our next complementary set. We'll take a look at yellow. So we're going to write yellow on our second row, and then its complement is violet. So we'll put violet on this side. And then our last set is red. And then across from red is green. So blue pairs with orange, yellow pairs with violet, and red pairs with green. So now we have our 3 sections, and we are ready to start painting. So before we really get started today, I do want to point out something. This is a learning experience for you. So if you make a mistake, don't panic today if, let's say, you paint a color and that color is not what you thought it was going to look like when you put it on your paper. Don't panic. You can do a couple of things to try to fix it. The first thing that you can do is, if you're very quick with a paper towel, as soon as you paint it and you realize that it's not the right color, you can dab it up with a paper towel. You can rinse your brush and take a brush with just water and wet that area and then dab it again with a paper towel, and that will lift up most of your color. But if that doesn't work, you could also take a second scrap sheet of paper and paint a square the same size that it would be here, let that dry, and then cut this out and glue it over top on top of the spot. That's a great way to save that, because this is really just a color mixing exercise. So if you have to cut out a section and glue it down on top, that's totally fine. This is really just a good way for you to practice learning how to mix different versions of the colors and understanding saturated to desaturated. We're going to start with just the primaries, and kind of right beside each one of these, we're going to paint a little swatch of the purest version of each one of those colors. I'm not going to make anything too precise. I'm just going to paint a little square with nice, rich, bright color. And I want to make sure I have plenty of paint mixed in this. I want this color really, really bold, and that looks great. Now I'm going to rinse my brush and do my other primary colors as well. And then for my red, make sure that you're using the warm red instead of the cool red for this part. And that looks great. So now I have a really nice, bright, saturated version of each one of my primary colors. Now on the other side, orange, violet, and green, my secondary colors, I'm going to mix those and paint those colors next to them as well. Now you want to make sure that you do mix a nice, true version of each secondary color, so you can look back at your color wheel to make sure. I don't want to have too much red in this orange. I want it to be a nice middle of the road orange. And notice, even on my palette, I'm setting up my opposites. So blue and orange, yellow and violet, red and green. That's going to make it a little bit easier for me to keep track of this while I'm mixing my colors. I think that looks about right. And now remember to make this color nice and saturated. You want it to be a nice, thick, bright color. We're only going to be putting one layer of paint down today, so it shouldn't be too washed out with too much water. Next, I'm going to mix my violet. So make sure you rinse your brush really well in between your colors. And this time for violet, I'm going to switch and use my cool red, just because that's the one that makes better violets. And last but not least, now I'm going to mix my green. Now I think that green might be a little bit too light, so I'm going to add some more and mix up a thicker version. And while it's still wet, I'm going to deepen that color a little bit more. I think that looks better. So now that I have my 3 sets of complementary colors painted out, blue and orange, yellow and violet, red and green, the next thing that we're going to do is start to mix those colors together. And I'm going to show you a way. We're going to start with what those colors look like here in the middle. And we're going to try to create as dull and neutral of a color as we can. That is about 50% blue and 50% orange. And I'm going to try to get what's considered a neutral color, where it ends up not looking really orange or blue. It's going to look probably turn into a really dark brownish color, because what's going to happen is the blue and the orange, as opposites on the color wheel, they basically cancel each other out as they are mixed and combined together. So I'm going to start by mixing a little bit more orange. And now what I want to do to this orange is start adding blue to it. So I'm going to get a little bit of blue and mix that in. And you can see really quickly that's going to start to dull down and cancel out that color. And now my goal is to try to get this color to be as dull and dark as I can without it looking like blue or orange. I want it to be a neutral in the middle. So right now it sort of looks like it's more in the yellowy family, yellow-orange family. So that's going to tell me to add a little bit more blue. That looks a little bit better. I'm going to add a touch more blue. And you can add the color in just very small increments, a little bit at a time. This takes a little bit of practice. And now it's starting to look a little green, so I think I've added too much blue, so now I'm going to add a little bit more red. Now there's a really great trick that I want to show you, how when you're mixing a color, to know what to add to get a neutral. So if you are looking at your color wheel, let's say that the color that you're mixing, if it looks too far in one direction, so let's say I've added too much blue to it, add its complement and that's going to neutralize it. So the opposite of blue is orange, so that tells me I should add a little bit more yellow and a little bit more red. And now that's actually starting, I think, to look pretty good. It should look like a really, really deep, dark, rich brown. That's what we're looking for. So it doesn't look too orange and it doesn't look too blue. It looks like a really dull neutral in the middle. You can also keep a scrap sheet of paper off to the side to test your colors on. And once you've got a color that looks good, you're going to paint a square in the middle. And that's going to be my neutral in the middle. Now, we're going to create a slightly desaturated blue and a slightly desaturated orange to kind of be the in-between steps from the bright to the dull, that in-between color for each one of those. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the color that I already have mixed and I'm going to add more blue to it to get this in-between color. So if I start adding more blue, you're going to see that it very quickly comes back into that blue family, but it's still much duller compared to a nice pure blue. So I think that looks pretty good. I can test that out. It should start to look pretty blue. We'll go a little bit more. Oh, I think that looks really good. It should look like a nice navy blue, kind of dark. And once you've got that color, you are going to paint it into that square. I'll go a little bit bluer with that. There we go. So this step here should be, it should look blue, but it should be a duller blue than the saturated one here, and it should be more blue than this dull neutral in the middle over there. And now we're going to mix this color. So I'm going to rinse my brush and come back over here. I still have some of this orange desaturated color over here on this side. So I'm just going to add more orange to it to bring it back from this color. So to come from the middle, I'm going to now add more orange to it. So add some yellow, add some red, until I get a color that's kind of in between those two. Test it out on some scrap paper. I'm going to keep going. That looks pretty good. I have my pure colors on the outside, pure blue and pure orange, where they're both very saturated and bright. Then I have blue with a little bit of orange, orange with a little bit of blue, and then in the middle is my 50-50 mix. And this is where I get to my neutral, where they've both canceled each other out and given me a nice dull neutral in the middle. So it is saturated on the outside and the most desaturated in the middle. So now we're going to go through and do that with our other sets of colors as well. Now if your paint palette gets messy as you're working, feel free to clean it off and get yourself some nice clean workspace. Now once you have some workspace cleaned off on your palette and you're ready to start mixing again, you're going to find that middle 50-50 desaturated version of your yellow and violet. So using that same process that we used for the orange and blue, you're going to follow through and do the same exact thing again. Look for that middle range 50-50 dark neutral in the middle. And once you have your most desaturated color in the middle, that darkest neutral, you're then going to try to find the left and right side colors, the slightly desaturated violet. You can add more red and blue to this mix to pull it back in that direction, and then you can work on finding your slightly desaturated yellow. Now one thing that I do recommend with the yellow when you get to that step is start back with a pure yellow and just add a tiny bit of violet. Yellow is that lightest color and it gets really, really quickly overwhelmed. So it's a little bit easier if you start back in with a pure yellow on that step. And then just add a tiny bit of that desaturated color to it. Now once your yellow and violet section is complete, you're going to follow through that same procedure again to complete the red and green pair. Start with a clean brush and a clean palette for this area, and then you're going to find that 50-50 mix, that most desaturated version in the middle. Now, one of the great things about doing all of these color mixing practices is they are really great to help you learn to mix colors more efficiently. You become more skilled at doing so. It takes less time the more that you do it, and you begin to have a good eye for color, being able to see if a color has too much of one thing in it. You can pull it back in another direction, and you can create an incredible range of colors with just that very limited palette. Now, this is great for artists because paints can be really expensive, especially when you're buying high quality and professional grade paints. So if you can mix all of your colors with less, that's going to end up saving you a lot of money in the long run, rather than having to buy a ton of different individual colors to get the specific ones that you want for whatever painting you happen to be working on. So this is a great time for you to practice this color mixing. Really slow down and take your time. I think mine took me about 45 minutes to complete from start to finish to get all of the right colors. And once you are finished and your painting has dried, label the top across that first row with bright on the outside colors and dull on the inside, and then draw some little arrows moving in. And then on the bottom row, label your outside colors saturated and your middle color desaturated, and add your little arrows to that section too. And then that completes your color mixing practice for today.